Welcome to Live with the Author. Today we're starting our special series of interviews with authors from our special issue on the science of reading. And today we have with us Steve Graham. Welcome, Steve.
Hi, Amanda. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks so much for joining me. Well, Steve, I've got to be honest, when I read your article, it was one of the first ones that I was in charge of, and I was floored. I was fascinated. And so let's spend a little bit of time thinking through your article. For those of you guys who are interested, you can find Steve's article on the Science of Reading website at ILA, and it's titled "The Sciences of Reading and Writing Must Become More Fully Integrated." So Steve, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to this work.
Well, initially, when I started in terms of my doctoral program, I minored in reading, and I was very interested in reading. I actually did a miscue analysis study. This was back in 1978, so it's a while back. And as I moved out of my doctoral program and I was having to write a lot, I realized that I was actually most interested in writing, but that kind of connection between reading and writing never went away. And I focused a good bit of my career on, what do we know about writing, how we can teach writing, how we can make writing a more integral part of the school day. But increasingly, I've come back around to the need to think about writing in the context of reading and the need to think about reading in the context of writing.
That's been really important to me. That's one of the things I keep learning from your work. So the science of reading seems to have lots of different definitions. People are thinking about it in lots of different ways. What is the science of reading to you?
So the science of reading to me is writ broadly. I really think that the focus narrowly is a mistake. I think we ought to think about the science of reading in terms of all facets of what we can look at in reading. And that would include how it operates, how it develops, what kinds of things we can do to help teach it, how do we use it throughout the day to help us with other kinds of tasks like learning tasks. What are the genetic, the environmental, the social, the cultural, the historical, the political, and we could go on, factors that influence how you read and how reading is acquired, as well as reading's effects on the individual and society and the reciprocal of that as it goes back to the individual. So my feeling is that we should look at the reading of, the science of reading in a very broad sense, because that's what, really it comes down to, is understanding all facets of it if we're to make the best decisions to help students become better readers and writers.
I think that's such an important point. I like that inclusion of better readers and writers, since we're kind of really thinking about the interrelationship during this talk. One thing that's been asked of me is, if we're thinking about the science of reading broadly, does that mean that everything's the science of reading? Or is there a line? How do we determine what is sciencey of reading and what's not?
Well, I'm very Catholic on this. I take a very broad view. So, one way you could look at me and you could look at the work I've done is I tend to do work in the quantitative area. But I don't see that as defining what we see as a science of reading or writing. I think we have a lot of tools at our disposal that we can use to better understand both reading and writing and how they develop and how we can facilitate that. And that it's not one single approach that gives us, good answers. And notice I didn't say the right answer, but gives us good answers. And we need to bring all of those tools and all of that information together to make good decisions. And I think those decisions are contextually bound, to be quite frank. How they play out is going to depend upon the context, both in the US and other places in the world. So I'm very Catholic on this. So I'm more inclusive on this than I would be exclusive.
I think that's such an important point. And, I've been fascinated. The more that I talk to researchers, I feel like the more that we are in agreement that it is this broad group of knowledge that we are both have, but also that we're developing, and that's constantly changing as we do more and more research. So let's talk about your study. How does your study add to the science of reading?
So I want to kind of approach this in a way of thinking about it a little bit theoretically. So, you can read without having to write or even knowing how to write. And so you might say, well, then what's the point here? But the reality is that when you learn to write and you write about what you read, it facilitates not only your understanding of text when you write about it, but learning how to write gives you knowledge and skills that you can use as a reader. And it goes the other way just as well, so that, you can't actually be a writer without knowing how to read. And it's an important point because a lot of the information you write about is likely to come from what you read, your vocabulary development, those words you use to get the right words in your writing, and your knowledge of syntax is also supported somewhat by your reading. So we have various things that we draw from reading, both in terms of knowledge and skills that helps us write. And, the other way of thinking about this is that when we read, it facilitates our thinking about what we write because we see what other authors do. And so those are things that we can try out in our own writing. And I would put this in a slightly different way as well. So one way of thinking about this, and I'm going to channel Tim Shanahan in terms of doing this because he's written extensively about it, is that you can think about this as that we have pools of knowledge that we draw upon when we read and write. And if you're doing something like trying to figure out what a word is, or you're trying to spell a word, we're drawing upon the same pools of knowledge. Or if you're using your knowledge about the structure of a genre, like you're reading a story, you're expecting certain things in that story. Well, when you write about it, that structure helps you think about how you're going to present your story and what you're going to say. So we draw on similar sources that can be enhanced either through reading or writing or both as a positive benefit. The other way of thinking about this is that both of these are communication activities. And I alluded to this a little bit before. But when you read, you don't always do this, but if you are analytic about it, you can think about why did the author use this particular word here? Why did he use this sentence structure? How did he speed up the rate at which I was going or felt the story was going? And then you can try that in your own writing. And obviously, when you write, you think about your audience, or hopefully you think about your audience and purpose. And that may make you more aware in the other direction in terms of thinking about, the writer and the audience, both in reading and writing. And then the final thing, and maybe as important as the other two, is we constantly use reading and writing together in various tasks that we do, and particularly in learning in school. We read to get information, we write to better understand that information, and both of those help us acquire greater knowledge and greater understanding of that knowledge. So in that sense, I think these two things are extremely connected. And it's, I actually feel it's a little silly to try to pull them apart as if they're different things because there's so many interconnections between them.
I hear that and I think back to my time as a fourth grade teacher and I think about the ways that I taught writing. And to be honest, so much of it involved reading. We would read all the various beginnings of, the model texts, and then they would write their own beginning, and then we would read different genres and they would write their own genre. But, when they were writing the genre, they came to different conclusions than when they were reading the genre because it really highlighted what things were missing via the writing instruction, our graphic organizers that they set up for their writing, say character development or whatever. It really highlighted what was actually in those texts that they had been reading as well. So I totally hear this. And this is one of the things that speaks to me both as a researcher and a teacher. And I think that makes me wonder, so what does your study add for teachers? What can teachers do tomorrow to integrate these findings into their instruction?
Well, so one of the things when you think about the formula that I just said is that, reading and writing occur together and they're interconnected and that each facilitates the other and can lead to development. Well, it means that we need to be doing both of these things. And I think, we're spending quite a bit of time in the elementary schools having kids read or providing instruction if you'd like. What we're not doing is spending much time on writing and writing instruction or connecting these two together. So I think one of the things that is very important to facilitate this process is start thinking about how can I use writing as a way to facilitate reading and how can I use reading as a way to facilitate writing. And that doesn't take a lot of special skill or knowledge to do that. For example, having kids read in advance of writing and helping them do a close reading of the material to figure out what they might draw from that reading material for their writing. That's a pretty straightforward thing in many ways. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's something that we can do now. Having kids take notes about what they read, make summaries of them, write about them in terms of their opinions about the information presented in the text, create a story out of the information that they've been reading, or talk about how to use it, or other ways that we can connect writing back to reading. At least in that sense, we've got more writing going on with the purpose of helping you understand, and more reading going on with the purpose of helping you to write. So I think that's a good starting point.
Amen. And it makes me wonder a little bit, Steve, though. So a lot of the writing that I see going on in the schools related to reading is questions, and then kids are supposed to write the answers. Then question, kid writes the next answer. Question. Is that the connection that you're thinking about? Or do you
No.
Or what, how?
So, and I said no really quickly on that.
But that's
so
important. It's helpful for us to understand. That's why I asked.
I don't want to take that away. There are times when doing that is important, and a teacher has a good reason for doing that. So I don't want to second guess why teachers do what they do. In some national surveys that we've looked at, when we've asked, say, middle school or high school teachers what kinds of writing activities they do, 4 come up as very common. Filling in blanks is number 1, which, may serve a learning purpose, but it's not a great connection. The second is writing single sentence responses to homework questions. The third is making lists. And the fourth is more like what you think about writing. It's creating a summary. So those tasks serve a purpose for middle and secondary school teachers. But what it would be great is if we could see more connected writing, where you're writing about something for a purpose that you're going to share for somebody else, that also has the purpose of extending your knowledge about what you just read. So yes, I'm talking about those tasks, so I'll take back my quick no, but in a minority. I'm really talking about doing more connected writing that has a purpose to help you better understand what you read and think about it. And I think that's the key with writing. Writing is thinking. It's a way of analyzing and thinking about the information you're taking in and displaying it so you can reanalyze it and rethink about it.
I love it. So you've been to classes all over the world. What's the classroom that you've walked into and seen like a great example of this?
Well, I'm going to give an example of my daughter's 5th grade classroom, and it's not going to sound like the example you might expect. She went to a Quaker school in the Washington, D.C. area, and this was in the early 1980s. The school had a whole language philosophy. And one of the things that I can say, even though I tend to be a little bit more on the explicit side, one of the things I can say is that the kids loved reading and writing. And in 5th grade, if you live in Maryland, Virginia, or Delaware, at some point in the elementary school grades, you're going to save the Chesapeake Bay. That's a time-honored tradition. So her class decided that to save the Chesapeake Bay, they would clean up a stream that ran behind the school, which would eventually empty into the bay. Now you're thinking, what has this got to do with reading and writing? Well, they acquired as much information as they could about how to clean up the stream, what its consequences were downstream in terms of the ecology in the bay itself. In terms of writing, they had multiple activities going on that were related to the reading that they did. They wrote 2 grants that they submitted to the College Park government to try to get funded. They weren't successful, but they took a good shot at it. They wrote a letter for the Washington Post, didn't get published, but they had two letters published, one in the University of Maryland paper and one in the College Park Times. They wrote letters that they put in every mailbox along in the neighborhood in which the school was located. And they held 2 rallies in which they wrote their placards. So they had all of this reading and learning that they were doing, and then they put it in action through their writing. And then after this was done, they also had some projects that they did to extend this out through the year. So here's a real activity that serves a real purpose. It has a social consciousness to it. And it was like, all you had to do was stand back and get out of their way. And, I thought it was one of the best examples of reading and writing coming together for a real purpose that I've ever seen.
I love that example. So it's the purpose, but it's also the fact that they had to read and write to accomplish their purpose. That was an authentic one. So what
And
is
in this case, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, so what does your article mean for principals and policymakers? How does it help those folks move their understanding of the science of reading forward and implement certain practices in their schools or more broadly across states and districts?
So I'm going to give an example here on the writing end, and I'm going to keep this to the writing part on this. When we've done national surveys with, say, teachers in 4th to 6th grade, teachers say that their kids spend no more than 20 minutes in a day writing. So that's not enough time. Quite frankly, it's a third of about the amount of time that I think we'd like to see kids writing during the school day and using writing as a tool connected to reading and learning. So I think one of the things that's very important here is to look at your language arts programs and look for that balance between reading and writing and making sure that's a school-wide that's a school-wide goal or objective. I think for policymakers at the state level, at the school level, if you like, at the school district level, or at the national level, we need to look for ways of bringing these two together. Now that means, in a sense, we have to place more emphasis on writing, but we have to be smart about that. We need to look for ways in which these two things can, in a sense, collaborate and support each other. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be specified time just for reading and specified time just for writing, but we need to do a better job of getting the two to work together and making sure they're a bit more balanced than they are now.
Well, it feels like it's almost like an efficiency thing, right? You can do them separately, but we don't have enough time in the day. So we've got to fit in enough writing time and reading time. We're going to have to integrate them effectively.
I think that's right. And I think we need to look across the subject areas as well to look to make reading and writing operate and work there. So, sometimes we have in our mind that we only have this set time during the reading block, so to speak, or the language arts or literacy block. But in reality, there's a lot of the day in which reading and writing can work together to support learning. I didn't talk about this in the article, but we've just published a meta-analysis looking at writing's effects on learning. And it had a positive effect in science, social studies, and math, and about an equal effect in each of those areas. So there's no reason why we can't use reading and writing either separately or together to help kids better understand what they're learning in social studies, better understand the skills that they're learning to use in math, and the same thing with science.
It's kind of like that content literacy perspective.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And we've lost that somewhat because they seem to be very separated, at least in my observations of what's going on in many schools.
Very cool. So what does your article tell parents? How do we become advocates for our children or even support learning at home?
So I'm going to go back to my daughter. When she was in 1st grade, I remember going to my first teacher parent conference. And all I asked about was, what is your reading program going to be? And that was a mistake, to be quite honest. My daughter struggled mightily with writing, particularly in terms of handwriting and spelling. They were her nemas. I mean, by 5th grade, she couldn't spell the word T-H-E-R-E correctly. And I'm not talking about it being confused with T-H-E-I-R. Her spelling was really a struggle for her, and her handwriting was slow and laborious. Now, she eventually overcame those, but to this date, she doesn't like writing. I wish that I would have asked about both of these things, and I wish that I had asked at each grade level. I could make the case that writing is an important skill in and of its own case, but I wish I'd have been more knowledgeable at that point of asking about that. The other thing that parents can do is have kids read and write at home, connect those activities. And, obviously they do this already, but show an interest in both of those. Often what you see, though, are the two are not connected together. We read with our kids and then we write with them. It would be great if we could bring those together a bit more often, because that would also help model and support this idea that kids see these as complementary skills that they use for everyday life.
That is so important. And I'm so glad we're having this conversation because I have a pre-Ker and I've got my teacher conference next week. And I don't think asking about the writing curriculum was on my list of things to do. And as a big reading person, I am big on reading with her, but I don't write enough and I don't connect enough with that. So I am going to implement these suggestions, Steve, and I'll let you know how it goes from
Okay.
here. The last people to talk about is, what do we do as researchers? How does this move the field forward, and how does this give researchers a kind of call to action for next steps?
Well, I think it broadens for researchers and scholars what they study. Because if you think now about reading as being reading and writing together, then it gives you more things to study. And so let me give an example of this. In some of the meta-analysis that we've done, what we see is that writing often, when there's, say, strategy instruction and reading comprehension, in many of the studies that we look at, writing is there, but it's never named. It's never pointed out. And we see the same thing in writing studies where all we talk about is the writing end. So I think it's important that we, first acknowledge that we already do this in research and use these together. But I also think it's important that we look at the individual and collective contributions of each of these skills, both in terms of predictive studies and also in terms of instructional studies. I would also say that it's important that we conduct qualitative studies to take a look at how these two interplay, how teachers view them, how students view them, the ways in which they're used outside of the classroom as well as inside the classroom. So I think there's a lot of opportunities that are open for researchers to think about new ideas and new questions to ask. And I'd expand on this a little bit. I'm talking about reading and writing, but really we're talking about language skills in general. So there's been much more emphasis in the reading area thinking about language. There's a lot of talk about it in the writing area, but you're hard pressed to find a lot of studies taking a look at that connection between, say, oral language and writing. And so I think if we think more broadly about reading, the science of reading, or the science of writing, and we incorporate other aspects of language into it, it'll give us a fuller and better picture of what we're really talking about. And we'll be able to make better decisions and give kids and teachers better choices in the future.
Yeah, it makes me think of one of these conversations I had with Debbie Rowe, and she was talking about how talk is a part of writing. Talk and sort of collaborative writing is that first step of brainstorming. You can talk with a partner or those kinds of things. And so you mentioned talking, thinking, reading, writing. It seems like we're hitting on the key areas there.
And quite honestly, if you're a writer, even when you're writing alone, you're constantly talking to yourself. You're doing it in your head, but you're thinking about what you're going to say next, how you're going to construct that idea into the right vessel with the right words to convey your ideas. So talking, even if it's not out loud to another person, there's this constant crosstalk as writers that we do with ourselves. And I would argue that in reading, it may not be going on quite as constantly, but we often think about and talk in our own heads about something that we find interesting as we're reading, or something that doesn't seem to fit, or something like, whoa, what just happened here? So I think that crosstalk is not only with others, but it's with ourselves.
Totally. So Steve, the science of reading is often divisive. And one of my goals is to figure out why. How have we gotten to this point? Because just like you and I talked earlier, when I did this project, what was really surprising to me was how much agreement there was on how broad the science of reading is. And so, do you have any thoughts about why it's so divisive and how we can bridge so that we can hear each other and learn and listen and grow?
Well, so one of the things that I think I'd like to say to start this is that this seems to be more of an issue in academia than I see in the schools. If we ask teachers about how they approach, let's say a natural learning, kind of natural learning approach, say something like whole language, or an explicit approach to either reading or writing, my conversations, they often say, if I don't bias them in a particular direction by the way I take the conversation, they tend to be very eclectic. They use what works. That's what they're interested in, is making a difference in their kids' lives, kids that they work with. I think one of the issues is that we've gotten ourselves, I liken it to, you have a paintbrush and you're at the front of a door into a room and you're going to shellac the floor. And we paint ourselves in academic corners, and we're painted ourselves into different academic corners. We're unable to move out of them, and we're unable to discuss in a rational way our beliefs and our assumptions with other people. So I think one of the things that's very important is to realize nobody has the truth. You know, we all have different pieces of this puzzle, and that if we really want to understand that, and that is our goal, and I think we all have the same goal. You know, for those of us in education, it's to make a difference for kids. And we all have the same goal, but we don't talk to each other, or we talk about each other in very disrespectful ways so the other or the other tribe, or however you want to put this, is not around. So I participated in something that Chuck Baserman brought together at the Writing Across Borders conference for two sessions, and brought together cognitive researchers and people who had a social cultural orientation in writing. And we spent about 6 hours together talking through, and everybody was so polite for the first 3 and 4 hours, you know, because nobody wanted to make that move because you were in front of an audience. But, you know, by the end of this, we actually had talked about some of our substantive differences and why different people felt this way in that. And so I think an honest conversation is one of our ways out of this, but it means that you have to be willing to listen. And so I think that's something maybe as academics, we're not always as good at as we think we are.
I so appreciate that. And it's a goal near and dear to my heart. So hopefully we can have that discourse as part of this special issue and as part of all these interviews and all that kind of stuff. So Steve, you know, we're at the final part of this interview. Is there any big ideas or anything that you want us to move away with as we think about reading and writing and the science of reading?
Well, so I would say one thing, and it's going to reiterate some of the points I've made, is reading has a lot of traveling companions with it. And writing is an important companion. In fact, I would say it's best friend. And I would say the same thing for writing. Reading is its best friend. So we want to put them together and let them travel together and let them help each other out. I think the second thing is we need to look, and I'm not taking anything away from reading by saying this, we need to look to make writing more prominent in the schools and connected, back to reading. So I think those would be the two things that I would say would be most important. And then the third is that, and this isn't going to solve the issues we have around this completely, but I would love to see more attention in our teacher preparation programs around both of these working together. What we typically see are courses in reading. When we interview teachers, most of them say they've never had a single course in writing, much less something coordinating them together. So I'd like to see a little bit more balance in our teacher preparation programs. And the reason I say it's not going to solve the issue completely is probably only about a half the teachers who go into teaching actually come through those programs because there's other avenues in. But it's a starting place. They have these two buddies, so to speak, ride down the road on the same bicycle or the same motorcycle, so to speak.
Yeah, and I like that analogy. And I'm just going to add in the one other thing I'm taking away from this is I keep thinking about your daughter's class. And so it's reading and riding a bicycle together, but to a purpose, to a place. Hopefully they have a fun-filled or exciting or purposeful destination in mind. Because just like you said, the whole goal is to put these things together in a way that the kids are so engaged that your job is to, of course, explicit instruction, all that kind of stuff, but partially just get out of the way so they can really read and write.
That's right. Let them do their own thing. We want them to be self-regulated. We want them to be motivated to use reading and writing as they move through life. And if we don't give them the opportunities to do that, I think there's less chance that they will do it as much as we hope they will.
And that example was even with your daughter, who you said didn't love to write. So when you provide these opportunities, kids learn to love to write. Well, thanks so much, Steve. It is always wonderful. I could talk to you forever. It's really one of my big joys. So thanks for joining me. And, if you are interested in Steve's paper, again, you can find that on the International Literacy Association's main webpage, as well as Reading Research Quarterly's webpage. And again, the title of Steve's paper is "The Sciences of Reading and Writing Must Become More Fully Integrated." Thanks so much, Steve.
Thank you, and thanks for letting me share my ideas. Bye, Amanda.
Always the best. I could listen to them forever. So thanks again. Take care.